Recently, I was walking past my old primary school. The big red brick building still standing there as if it was waiting for the bell to ring again and the ghosts of children would spill out at lunchtime. There's this thing that happens sometimes when you go back to a place that shaped you, back to a city that still holds a version of you that you've long since outgrown. I was just standing there outside the school. I had this memory, something that I hadn't thought about in nearly 30 years, of the night that we broke in. Well, broke in is maybe pushing it a little bit. We didn't smash windows or pick locks. We were wandering past and one of the doors had been left open, just open like an invitation. And we did what any responsible 10-year-old would do in that situation. We walked in. You can tell how proud I am of this story. Now you think that a bunch of kids let loose in a school at night would head straight for the footballs or the gym hall, or maybe that mythical cupboard with all the tuck shop treasure. But not us. We went upstairs, down the corridor, and straight to our primary 5 classroom. Because in that room, on a wooden table near the window, was an old BBC computer. Even then, it wasn't exactly state of the art. And on the computer was a game, but not a game like Mario or Sonic, but a game based on a story that our teacher had written, where every choice opened up a new path. Left or right, help the stranger or run away, open the door or stay in the dark. And depending on what you chose, the story twisted and turned into something entirely different. In class, we only ever got maybe 5-10 minutes at a time, just a taste, just long enough to leave us wanting more. But that night, in the silence of a sleeping school, we had all the time in the world. The whole story was ours to explore and shape. We could choose any path, any future, any version of the story. And what I remember most wasn't the glow of the screen or the thrill of doing something that we really definitely shouldn't have been doing. It was this sense and awareness that story is alive. It bends, it moves, and it waits for us to choose. Later at university, and I can't tell you too many of those stories, but later at university I studied a strange but brilliant German playwright called Brecht. And with a name like Bertie, he might as well have been Scottish. He wanted theatre to wake people up. He didn't want the audience to be comfortable or lulled into forgetting. He wanted them to realise that what happens on stage isn't fixed or inevitable. He broke the fourth wall, interrupted scenes, had characters step out and comment on their own actions. And each night, he'd get the audience to decide how the play should end. Because he believed that if people could watch a story and realise that it doesn't have to be this way, then maybe they would start believing the same about their world. That the world doesn't have to be what it currently is. That injustice isn't destiny. That violence isn't fate. That compassion is always an option. That love is a path that you can choose. In our first reading this morning, we stumble into John the Baptist. We meet him out in the wilderness. John is the original disruptor. He's someone who refuses to play by the temple's rules. The one who steps out of the system to announce that God is doing something new. I love how Eugene Patterson in The Message describes him. He gives it this wild sandpaper texture, describing John as thunder in the desert. John is Brecht with a beard, interrupting the stage, breaking the fourth wall, and shouting to anyone who will listen, "Wake up. The story is moving. The story is changing. This story doesn't have to be what you think it will be." John takes this ancient ritual, washing, the ceremonial cleansing reserved for holy spaces and holy moments, and drags it out into the open air, into the river, out into the grit and dust and the sweat of ordinary life. A temple ritual, but now for everyone, not controlled by the priests, not confined to marble rooms and velvet curtains. A washing, yes, but more like a turning, a reorientation, a choice. Because for John, baptism isn't about who's pure enough, it's about who's willing, who's ready, and who wants to step into a different story. Turn your lives around, he says. God's kingdom is here. And then in our second reading, Paul, years later, writing to a messy, divided church in Rome, picks up the same thread and widens the frame. In the Voice translation, it sounded like he's turned on all the house lights and is looking the congregation straight in their eyes. This story isn't just for one group, not just for the insiders, not just for the ones with the right lineage or the right theology or the right background. No. Jesus came to extend God's mercy to all people, Jews and Gentiles, the heritage crowd and the newcomers, the ones who've belonged forever and the ones who've always assumed that they never could. Paul stacks up these ancient promises of Moses, of David, of Isaiah, not to prove a point, but to show a pattern. God keeps pulling more chairs up to the table. God expands the guest list. God keeps saying, yes, them too, and them, even them, and all of them. Hope, Paul says, is supposed to overflow. It's supposed to spill out, cascade beyond boundaries. Because hope isn't neat. It doesn't colour inside the lines. And maybe that's the thread that runs from John's River to Paul's letter to that old BBC computer game to Advent itself. God's story is always unfolding outward, further, wider, and more spacious than we could ever expect. In that first Christmas story, God shows up in the most unlikely of places. And a teenage girl from a nowhere part of town, and a frightened young man, and shepherds keeping watch in their fields, and a family that nobody expected, in a back alley manger, and the ordinary, overlooked, forgotten corners of the world. God chose these new characters, and in doing so, a new story emerges. A story where the margins are now the centre, where the overlooked are invited, where the world itself is turned upside down. Mary says yes. The shepherds leave their flocks, and Joseph trusts God's message. Every choice shifts the story. Every inclusion rewrites what's possible, and every act of courage opens up a new chapter. Advent reminds us that the story isn't finished. It bends, it breathes, and it waits for your next move. God is still showing up in unexpected places, inviting new characters and turning the world upside down, and asking us, who will you make room for? What old boundary will you redraw? What new path will you step into? So this Advent, may you see that the story you're living isn't fixed, that it's not finished, it's not locked down. It bends, it breathes, it waits for your next courageous choice. May you discover in the ordinary rhythms of December, in the commute, in the conversations, the quiet moments that no one else sees, that God is already there, whispering possibility, nudging you towards the path that leads to life. May you choose hope in a world addicted to cynicism. May you choose generosity when everything in you wants to hold back. May you choose light, not because the dark isn't real, but because the light is how the story keeps moving forward. May you find yourself surprised by compassion, startled by joy, and caught off guard by grace, in places that once felt ordinary or forgotten, in a childhood street, a muddy park, or in a manger in the middle of nowhere. And may you know deep in your bones that the God who comes to us as a child comes still, arriving in the fragile, the unexpected, and the choices we make and the stories that we tell of our lives. This Advent, may you notice the doors left open, the ones you never expected, and the ones that you've walked past without realising that they were invitations. This Advent, may you step in, say yes, walk through the door that's been there waiting for you the whole time. The story is alive, like that night and that old primary school. You could choose anything. So choose life, choose love, choose grace, choose hope. Choose well. Amen.